it is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Frank, aka the Watcher of the Almighty Fen. It is so great to be able to talk with you. Thanks for being here today.
Not a problem. Thanks for the interview, Alex. Looking
Any
forward to it.
Anytime, man, anytime. It's so great to have you here. Your new album, Monuments to Absence, is absolutely beautiful. Is this just sort of like, did this sort of feel like just a continuation or a follow up to what we heard on the Deadlight in a way, or was this meant to be sort of like a new beginning for Fen?
It's yeah, it's not so much a thematic follow up to the Deadlight or really stylistically. It's more just it's just something that needed to be said. It's an album that sort of emerged. With the Deadlight, we covered a lot of sort of quite progressive and quite sort of cold spatial ground. But I was even during the process of composing that album, I was starting to feel something a bit darker, something a bit angrier building within, and it was hard to sort of pinpoint why that was. Um, some material that was written around that time has actually made its way onto Monuments to Absence. It didn't feel appropriate to sort of fuse it where the Deadlight was turning out. I'd say actually thematically and sort of in terms of its overall atmosphere, I think this is probably the natural successor to Carrion Skies, our fourth album. That was quite an album which carried with it quite a lot of anger. I was quite outward looking. Normally our material is quite inward looking. It reflects on the self and yeah, it's quite personal how it expresses it. Karen Skies was the first time we really turned the searchlight outwards to sort of focus on something more traditional black metal topics as human failings, society's failings, civilization's failings, if you will, and really, Monuments to Absence is probably a spiritual successor to that kind of outlook. Just taking it down probably even more intensified, distilled and darker path. So that's kind of how putting it in context. At the time when you're writing it, that you're working kind of on instinct, an element of design. It's only in hindsight that you start to see how the journey of these things has come to where they are.
Yeah. Wow, I got to give you a round of applause. I had all the questions I wanted to ask you in mind, and in just those 2 minutes, you just answered almost all of them. So good.
Sorry, I do tend to ramble.
I knew this was going to be a good interview. When I first heard I discovered you guys throughout my musical journalism adventure, and I said, man, I got to interview this band. I know it will be a good interview. And God damn it, if I be right. So
cool. Wow, great. Glad to be of service.
But as a fan of Fen, you mentioned a good point, because when you compare Dustwalker to Carrion Skies to Winter, the Deadlight, etc., I can almost tell what song would be off of each album in a way. So with your very relatively experimental sort of post gazing black metal style, it's fair to say that there's a lot of different elements you could bring into it, right? It's got to make it a little bit easier to sort of try new things and bring new elements.
There is, I totally agree with that. And that's something that reflects back to when we started the band. We didn't want to put any limits in place, but equally we didn't want to be a complete, jumble of experimental ideas. We didn't want to be bracketed with the avant-garde sort of thing. We wanted to make what was ostensibly atmospheric black metal, but we wanted to remove some of the barriers to other types of styles, other genres. So we were consciously bringing in post-metal and shoegaze, progressive music, but it had to be coherent and it had to be cohesive. And I think you're right. I think that the whole sort of post-black metal, shoegaze black metal world does lend itself to experimentation, trying new sounds. Just one example, it's a lot more accepted to bring clean guitar into the mix and actually have clean guitar really carry sections and whole passages. I think the danger is, as that sort of post black metal scene has matured and it's become established, certain familiar tropes start to creep in, and you have the sort of soft, loud, big melodic lead guitar over sort of relatively familiar chord progressions. And I think part of when we were writing Monuments for Absence was very much kind of, I wanted to steer away from that.
Yeah.
I wanted to steer away from being another post-black metal band. And it worries me that sometimes you fire up an album within 30 seconds, you know exactly how the whole album's going to sound when you get to the end of it. And with Monuments Sounds, while still operating within those parameters, I wanted to make it distinct. I wanted to try and push the boundaries of some of the melodies that are in there. And bringing that post-black metal concept, but just making it slightly more subtly delivered, if that makes sense. Trying different time signatures and trying to not make it so obviously post-black metal, not make it so obviously progressive by having constant switches of things, just making it, weaving it into the fabric of the songs.
Well, let's get the silliest question out of the way, actually, because I've had this conversation. I never knew what that term post means, because I've heard post black metal, post hardcore, post death metal, post nasal drip. Like, I've heard all of it. Like, I'm just curious to what that term post exactly means, because post usually means after something. So what is it like? And also, like, a lot of the bands that are labeled in that post black metal category, like, you guys sound, I would say, very different from a band like Death Heaven, and they sound very different from a band like Astronoid, which sounds very different from a band like Agalok. So, like, what would that post aspect really mean?
I mean, I'm no sort of academic on the whole sort of thing, but my view is, I think the whole post terminology started with post rock. I think that's where post started getting slapped in the front of certain genres, partly because people didn't really know how to bracket the sound of bands like Slint and Mogwai, bands that were coming out there playing. I mean, Slint obviously had vocals, but you started to get this predominantly instrumental, loud, soft, dynamic kind of music that was, rooted in rock ostensibly, but it was also it was atmospheric. It had elements of progressiveness in there. A lot of it was led by sort of clean guitars, experimentation with guitar effects. And I think that's where the term came in. If you listen to post metal, it's kind of essentially down-tuned, hard metal with just sort of cleaner sections and atmosphere and build. And I think post black metal was a convenient way of applying that thought process to what people were doing with black metal. Bands like ourselves and Watcher of Plagues and those kind of bands that were switching off the distortion and allowing things to build and having long sort of atmospheric sections that were building up and all that kind of stuff. I think that's where the post black metal tag got applied. Yeah, for me, I think black metal had that kind of experimentation back in the 90s. You have bands like Enslaved, you have bands like Fluidity, all doing that kind of experimentation. And really, I think the concept of post black metal is just a convenient genre tag rather than describing completely how something's going to sound.
My theory is that I think, because you're right too, like Emperor even brought on those experimental elements as well, and like, but it's funny to me. My theory of post, and I'm not saying this like it's a bad thing or I'm making fun. I think people started using that title because they were afraid to admit that there were softer elements in their sound. Because let's be real, like Fen does have softer elements than what I would hear on a Mayhem or a Dark Throne or a Dissection, but also like in post-hardcore bands like At the Drive-In, which has been labeled post-hardcore, has a lot of softer elements than a Sick of It All or an Agnostic Front. So like I think really that post thing is just a way of being able to say, yeah, we bring softer elements without having to like really advertise it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair enough statement. I'd go further and say I think it really, my view of it is, it boils down to bands of those genres that were bringing elements of what was becoming established in post rock into it. So it's bands that were, which generally tends to be, cleaner guitars, atmospheric builds, lots of reverb, lots of kind of experimentation with guitar effects, big instrumental sections. I think my view, that's how I see it, is that's what post really signifies. If I see post in front of any type of rock or metal music, I think, right, they're going to turn the distortion off points in these songs. They're going to slow it down. We're going to have a 2 to 3 minute sort of tribal build that's going to build, and we're going to have this big climax and repose. We're going to have the songs that ebb and flow like that. I think for me, that's what the post signifier really boils down to. I was going to view it in quite a reductive capacity, but I'm sure there's an academic out there who's probably going to be gnashing their teeth right now and saying, no, it's not. But that's my view of it, and I've got no problem with being bracketed in with that, because we consciously decided to take influence from post rock when we started the band. We were like, look, let's take an atmospheric black metal template, and I can see the overlaps. I can see ultimately black metal for me has always been had a big component, should I say, which is about delivering atmosphere. And I say post rock tends to be quite atmospheric. Let's bridge these two, and post metal as a sort of tangential thing. Bands like ISIS and those sort of bands were another influence at the start. Again, adopting a similar philosophy of that's almost an almost elemental approach to things. Allowing that ebb and flow and allowing clean guitars to come in and guitar effects and really building to a sort of crescendos. So that was my take. And so I don't mind the genre tag if it helps someone understand what they're going to hear. That's fine. That's all genre classifications really are. It's sort of a way of preparing somebody for what they're about to listen to. You know?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't consider the genre thing to be like, some people have their criticisms, but then I agree with some of them. But I also think, if it's gonna open people's minds to things, I'm all for it. I wanted to talk about the concepts of Fen too, because you mentioned that too, that there's some external sources and some internal sources that influence the sound of a Fen album. Like, since Winter came out in 2017, that is my Winter Solstice album. On the first day of winter, I have to listen to that album every time. I get a real atmospheric element behind it. But you're right, that with like an album, I feel like such like your first album, the Meditation Fields, or Meditation Fields, if I butchered that, I
No, that's fine.
apologize. But like I feel like that had more of sort of like an internal aspect behind it, an emotional standpoint in it. Depending on the subject matter, can that alter how you write the music in a way, and does it resonate with you in a different way as well?
Yeah, I mean, so the overall album themes start to take shape once we've got maybe half the material has started to get written and to be written, and you'll start to feel that it's pointing in a certain direction, and it starts to resonate with you in a certain way, and then it becomes a kind of almost kind of like a sort of feedback loop. You write more within that style, and that sort of starts to intensify, going and reinforce that direction. So I think there's definitely something within that. I mean, those albums you mentioned, Benediction Fields and Winter, are actually, they're kind of, and again, it's one of those things you only really start to appreciate once it's completed and you can see it in context. They're kind of companion pieces in a lot of ways. They talk very directly about the landscapes of the fens where we grew up, but a lot of that is used as a metaphor for quite a sort of personal consideration. I think the Malediction Fields is a little bit more wide reaching, but it generally talks about sort of a sense of inner loss, a sense of isolation, a sense themes of depression. Winter is very much focused on death, rebirth, and passage of time and decay. And I think that it is true that once you've sort of the material is starting to take shape, we'll then apply an album. We'll start to feel how the album's going to look, if that makes sort of sense. Music can be quite visual. It can start to inspire certain colors and certain sort of landscapes in your own mind's eye, and then that again reinforces the direction the music goes. And then you start to produce some lyrics that again supports that, so it all sort of moves towards a unifying shape. We always write concept albums in the loosest sense. It's not concept album in the traditional sort of Operation Mindcrime, heavy metal opera type of thing, but there's always a thread that runs through the albums. There's always something that connects the tracks. There's always something that really means that the album should really be taken in its entirety to get the full picture of what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I've always said like the difference between being religious and spiritual. I feel like it's also that way with albums. There's a difference between being a concept album and it being conceptual. And I do consider Fen's music to be very conceptual in terms of like I feel like it takes you through a different atmosphere. Like when you open up with Exile's Journey on your first album, I mean, that immediately immerses you into a witness of the passing of aeons and then into colossal voids, etc. But then when you like really listen to an album such as a Carrion Skies, and you open up with like that 2 series song, Our Names Written and whatnot, it almost seems like it's able to sort of take you through a different narrative every time. Is there at all any forethought or at all any time like a preconceived vision in that? Or you mentioned it always kind of comes as you're writing more and more music and as it takes shape?
The music comes first. The music will come first. Although there are times when there's a general impulse, and I know it's hard. It can vary from record to record. Definitely, for example, with Winter, when we before we'd written any of it, we decided we wanted to write something that was exceptionally, we were like, right, and sometimes you'll just come up with a sort of creative idea. And the three of us sat down, I was like, right, let's write a record that's really structured around more, try and create almost like a yes record, something like it was, incredibly progressive, no repeating of themes. So why don't we set a musical goal. We're not going to repeat a riff on this record. We might bring a theme back and play it in a slightly different way, but there's not going to be any chorus, things like that. And the original plan for that album was actually to do it as one long song, which we sort of chickened out of in the end. But the tracks do run into each other. They've just got so actually it is just one long piece with just breakpoints,
I
right?
never
The
understood
six,
that. That was Insomnium's album, Winter's Gate. It's like one song album, but like it's all labeled still like in divided parts. So like I.
Yeah, it's a tough one for us because it was. I mean, the things are sort of written and you can sort of structure them together. But we did the whole. We did at one point want to just put it together as a single track to say, look, that I just thought that's just going to annoy people, isn't it? You know, 177-minute track. And then Bellwitch put out Mirror Reap, which was like 183-minute track.
Yeah.
People went berserk for it. I was like, oh, maybe we should have stuck to our guns on it. But yeah, what's done is done. But going back to the point, we did. There are times when you will sort of like set yourself a sort of creative ambition for the album, but that's not really about the atmosphere. That's more just like setting ourselves a musical creative challenge. In terms of the sort of the atmosphere of the album, that generally tends to come in once the music started to take shape. Although with Monuments to Anger, there was a darkness and an anger sort of building that I think probably came potentially before any of the music really started to get properly crystallized. There might have been a riff or two, and then you start to think, actually, yeah, this is the road we need to go down. This is the space we're in at the moment. We need to plow this furrow and work in that space. And then that really, again, once you start making those decisions, and once you start realizing the direction you want to go in, it becomes quite sort of mutually inspirational. You realize what you're aiming towards. You start to build a vision, and you start to build a goal that you actually want to musically work towards.
Yeah. Well, I've never considered, and I mean it as a compliment, I never considered Fen's albums to be really shuffle friendly in a way. Like there are some albums where like, oh, I just want to listen to these two songs, or I'll listen to the first three songs and not go with the other ones, or maybe I like to start off at the end and mix it around. Like when I listen to the Deadlight, I have to start off with Witness and I have to end with Rendered in Onyx and etc. So it almost seems like every album is a journey in itself. But when you work on an album for a long period of time, especially because you guys know how to embrace those long songs, do you find it like a little more difficult to sort of maintain the emotion or maintain the energy that initially sparked that idea?
No, not really, because I think as it starts to take shape and it starts to form and starts to have an identity, it just becomes more exciting. Because you move from a sort of primordial collection of ideas, and into something that's starting to become a musical entity in its own right, and that actually, once it becomes kind of tangible in that way, then it becomes, as I said earlier, it's quite sort of mutually reinforcing. It becomes almost inspiring. This is what we worked for. This is our idea. Oh, great. Okay, we can do this, and we can, the most. For me, the most daunting part of any album creation is those the first period when you're sort of just finding out what is it we want to say here, which direction do we feel, what's inspiring us, where are we seeing that we're going now, and making sure that everyone's kind of aligned with that journey. Once you're on that path, it just becomes more exciting and more motivating. It's almost like your authors talk about the terror of a blank sheet of paper, and I think it's a similar thing musically. A lot of people like to think there's this kind of news that strikes them on high from out of nowhere that will just provide unfettered creativity. I'm sorry to say, and 9 times out of 10, that's a load of bollocks. Creativity comes from, you have to work at it. You have to work through ideas. You have to sort of really dig deep to get, inspiration is one thing. That's fine, and that can inspire you to start the process. But really, true inspiration comes from when you're sort of pushing through. If you sit down with the guitar, the first 45 minutes, you're just dusting off the cobwebs. You're just kind of, it's only once once you sort of get into the zone and enter almost a meditative state that really interesting stuff starts to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, for me, as I say, once you start to get those building blocks, you start to get things together, and you start to see where you're going with it, see what as you say, you talk about a journey earlier. I've always said that every one of our albums is intended to be a journey. It's supposed to reflect a pathway, and that's when it gets exciting, when you can start to plot where the journey's going. That actually is energizing.
And you also took another question right out of my mouth in a way, and this is awesome because I was going to ask if inspiration really something that could be sought out? Is inspiration really something that you could just look for, or is that just something that has to strike you in a way?
It's a bit of both, and an inspiration can hit you in the weirdest of places. Walking down the street to work, suddenly it's like you'll be daydreaming and you'll have an idea will hit you. But and that's true, and that's the romantic artist ideal is just the lightning bolt of inspiration from on high. But I'm I tend to lean more on the fact that actually you do need to work at it sometimes. It's all right and good to get an idea out of nowhere, but you've got to take that and make it into something meaningful. And you've got to make sure that it's something that's saying something, and you've got to work at it, and you've got to refine it and hone it. Um, you know, it's yeah. I think there's a lot more discipline and graft in creativity than people give credit for. To be perfectly honest, and the people I look up to who are, I would say, creative geniuses, and seem to be massively inspired. They're working hard, because it's something that needs to be respected. I think if you sort of have the mindset, it just strikes me, and then that just flows out. It can happen every now and then, but I think if that's your sort of sole avenue for sort of creativity, then if that just feels slightly lazy, just sitting around waiting for something to happen. That's not really how I'm wired up. I believe that there's a little bit more determinism. You've got to make things happen in a lot of cases. You've got to prepare yourself. You've got to sit down, get into a mindset. It's sort of it's almost like some sort of meditative process. You've got to get yourself into a place where you can start to let that inner process flow, because ultimately creativity isn't striking from on high. It isn't something that comes out of the atmosphere. It's all in here, and it's about unlocking that. It's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And my tattoo artist once said that if she only tattooed when she was inspired, she wouldn't pay her rent. So like there's like you can't wait for inspiration. It does strike you sometimes, but like there's so much art out there, whether it be in books or movies or visual art, other music. It's just everywhere. Like inspiration is almost like water. It's everywhere, even when you wouldn't realize it.
But it's internal as well. This is the point I make. You can condition. My view is you condition yourself to get into a mindset whereby the inspiration flows, and it's hard work. It's like breaking through the wall when you're exercising or something like that. Sometimes it's like maybe I'm not in the mood to play tonight. So no, I'll pick up the guitar and see where it goes. And if you've got enough time, it takes time as well. This is the other thing. We live in a time poor culture. We're constantly distracted. We've got social media sites bombarding us day in, day out. Video games, films, TV, thousands of TV channels, all designed to disperse our attention. Inspiration and creativity comes from focus a lot of time. You need to get into that mind space. And some of the most productive, inspiration comes from where you can just sort of you have to go through, as I said earlier, you have to go through that dusting off, that cleansing period to really get into that space. And then hitting that moment, hitting that sort of sweet spot where you've managed to sort of cleanse yourself of distractions and hit the focus point is rewarding in itself. It takes some work to get there, but once you've got the momentum going, it can be incredibly satisfying and liberating to be in the zone, as it were.
Yeah.
You can't just pluck it. For the most part, you can't just pluck it out of you.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
you're lucky sometimes it happens, but
yeah. I mean, I think it's great that we have all of these platforms and all of these mediums, because there's so many different ways that we could get inspired. I think that there's a lot of people who are artists now who wouldn't have been able to bring art into the world they didn't have all that access to that type of media. And I think it's really cool. Like, yes, you're right, inspiration does have to be focused, but also you kind of have to have a little bit of that ADHD and be like, oh, I like that, I like that, I like that, I like that, and then really focus at everything that's in front of you.
Yeah, you've got to observe. You absorb. Sorry, your stimulus, and you've got to bring it. But there has to come a point where it condenses down. It has to be realized into something. And I've met too many people who are just repositories of ideas that withered on the vine due to distraction or never. There will come a point where you need to work and you need to focus on it. Discipline needs to be applied, and that's just the nature of it. I haven't met anyone who's had a creative project that hasn't met, that's got some traction, that hasn't knuckled down and really acknowledge that they need to grind the gears every now and then. But going back to your point on social media, no, I mean it's an incredibly useful platform. Indeed, we got our break through MySpace. Back in, if anyone out there remembers that. And I think it's
I just find it ironic. You're the first non-emo metalcore band to say that you got your breakthrough through MySpace. Like I'm not gonna lie, it was the last place I was expecting you guys to get your breakthrough.
No, we just put up a demo on our first HSR. We put it up on a MySpace page. It was just as a platform to host it and share it with a few friends, and then I can't remember how it happened, but on MySpace, I had quite a good way of you could sort of send friend requests and you could search by who was into certain genres. And just out of sort of like curiosity, I was sending it to completely random people and it started to get quite good reactions. And then we got, Northern Silence label was somebody I sort of pinged and they seemed really interested in it. And I was like, okay, seems to be working. Yeah, it was a great platform at this time. I mean, obviously, it's been long since supplanted by Instagram and Facebook and God knows what else. But I know for me, more about that distraction is more about just everything that bombards us in it. And yeah, and I know it happens to me. I'll sit down in a chair sometimes after getting from work, and then suddenly after I've been on my phone just scrolling for half an hour, I'm like, where's the time gone? It's but yeah, that's where we are.
Being that it's for this next question, I figure it's appropriate because this year does mark 10 years of Dustwalkers. But I've always said that art is life, and when you bring it into the world, it can grow and it can develop, and it can also sometimes eventually die as well. Do you believe like the journey or the meaning of your music can evolve with you as you evolve as an artist? Because I feel like songs like Hands of Dust or Spectre or Wolf's Son do kind of have like its own evolution. Like I'm able to have different conclusions on it now than if I first listened to it in 2013. So do you think that the art can evolve with you as you evolve over time, or do you prefer if everything you create is a snapshot of who you are, you prefer to keep Dustwalkers in 2013 or the Malediction Fields in 2009, etc.?
There's also, I suppose the answer sounds like a bit of a cop out is yes and no. When you record an album and you record a piece of music, it's obviously a frozen moment in time. It's a representation of what you did there and then. But equally, if you're continuing to play that live, that song is, every live performance of that is a subtly different iteration of what came before. And I know, we play songs from back in the early days live. Now they take on a slightly different hue. Some of the arrangements have changed subtly. So stuff that becomes part of your live set is ever changing. And it's the recordings that are kind of frozen at that point. The song itself, you could play it. I could play it on an acoustic guitar if I could remember how to play it, and it would take on a different hue. So there's a bit of yes and no in that, really. It's definitely a reflection of what you want to achieve at that time and what you needed to say at that time. But equally, there are things you're probably saying, or there are some inferences there that you probably weren't even aware of. Again, you look back and say, and sometimes you're not fully conscious of exactly what it is that you're trying to express. It's like that piece I mentioned earlier about Malediction Fields and Winter being almost companion pieces. Only after they were both recorded and we got to the end of the process of doing Winter, it's like, these really are linked, these albums. And that's kind of, it's happened by accident, but it's almost, it must be something subconscious there that's come into play. So, I think, art is always evolving, and you're as someone who's part of a band that's been going on for quite a while, you're steering it through versions of itself. And after a certain point, you don't own it. You're just a custodian of something that is its own entity. And really, your job is to nurture that and make sure that it's the best version of itself that it can be. So I think it's sort of rambling on. I'm not sure I completely answered the question.
But please ramble. I love it when you ramble.
But I think ultimately, going back to that, I think music, songs as they are, say Dustwalkers 10 years ago, that album is where it is, and it's a statement of what it is. If we were to play the material from that album now, it would be that material. We'd deliver it as faithfully as we could, but just by nature of the fact that we've got 10 years of growth as individuals behind us, 10 years of the band behind us, we perhaps reflect on it in a slightly different way. It might be delivered slightly differently. Subtle differences, but it's there. Particularly also, I'd say, in the context of what's come after. When you record now, that's your final statement at that point in time. Since Dustwalker, we've got 4 more albums now. So Dustwalker then changes in context of what's come after it. So then you have a slightly different viewpoint of that as well. So there's a lot of different ways of interpreting that.
And finally, the final part I wanted to ask you is sort of like when you do play songs live, because you have so many albums out now, and you have to bring it, you have to put a set list together, and go songs from all over the spectrum of your catalog. So like if you play, you open up with a Winter song, and then play a Dustwalker song, and then play a couple songs off the Deadlight, and then Monuments to Absence. Does it almost feel like the journey kind of alters when you are going through those different eras of time in one set list? Does it almost maybe kind of bridge different worlds together in a way?
Yeah, you can definitely feel it. And it's the earlier stuff is probably a little bit more simple, so we can sort of cut loose a bit more on that. But equally, when you're playing newer stuff, it just by virtue of its freshness, and particularly if you're touring some material for the first time, it can be delivered with a bit more vigor. But the set we like to construct sets in the same way that we sort of construct albums. We like to try and turn it into a journey, and we really put a lot of thought and consideration into making sure that there are songs that complement each other but aren't just the same thing again and again. So there's ebb and flow, but there's also cohesion. It's difficult if you've got a 40-minute, 45-minute set. You've got 6-7 albums, and your average song length is 8-9 minutes. Invariably stuff gets missed. And I know our drummer, he's like, let's play this off this old album. Let's play this off this old album. I was like, we could learn an old song off that album, but we've also got a new album that's about to come out, and we've got stuff needs to make way. So it's always the live as bands get older. I'm sure the set list discussions just get more and more difficult.
Yeah, you're gonna have
for us. It's very much. But we like to structure them. We like to put a lot of thought into that, and we like to make it fun for ourselves and also fun for the audience. We want to make sure we represent the history of the band, but we want to make sure that it all makes sense, ties together.
You're always gonna have those one fan too who may want like that underground deep cut before Ancient Sorrow or something like that you never released.
Yeah, you'll get someone yelling for Desolation Embrace down the front or something. But to be fair, we sometimes if we've got a longer set, we will go back to the Ancient Sorrow EP. We'll play the Gale Scream of Loss off of that. If we've got time, we played that on the tour we did last year a few times. It's a nice way of finishing a set sometimes. It's it's a very, very straightforward song. It's quite atmospheric, and that can be a nice way of just kind of seeing out an evening. Nothing's off the table. We have had discussions about perhaps shaking up the set list and dragging out some earlier cuts that maybe haven't seen the light of day that much over the last few years. But then again, I'm conscious we've got a new album coming out in a couple of months, and that will need representation. And we are keen to play stuff from that album. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it goes down live.
Hell yeah. Well, before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time and for such an awesome conversation. It's great to finally get a Fen on here, just with the release of Monuments to Absence. Anything else you'd like to promote, as well as when the fuck can you guys come to the United States?
Oh, God, it's probably easier to play the States than the Europe at the moment now. Christ, I'm like, thanks for the interview, man. It'd be great to head back over. We played the States once in 2012. We had an absolutely fantastic time. So if we can get back over, we'd love to. I know our drummer plays in another band. Actually, did a tour of America last year, so it's obviously not impossible. It's just we have the right promoters, we have the right organizations, and get the logistics in place. It'd be something we'd be really up for doing. We want to play live more. We want to get out there and get this album showcased. So I'd say to your readers, viewers, listeners, not quite sure, all three perhaps. No, just check out the album. We've got a new track coming out tomorrow, so there'll be an announcement probably late morning tomorrow, maybe. I'm not entirely sure what time it's going out, but so another song from the album is landing, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Album comes out 7th of July. We think it's good, we're pleased with it, and hopefully we'll be able to get over to America and showcase it on stage.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Fen. Be sure to check out Monuments to Absence, coming out July 7th. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Cheers, man.